When the town's most respected pastor was found dead in his own home, no one wanted to believe the whispers. But the truth, a forbidden love affair with a dangerous ex-convict, would shatter everything the community thought they knew about faith, trust, and betrayal. In the quiet town of Brooksville, respectability was currency, and Pastor Jonathan Miles was one of its wealthiest men, not in money, but in reputation. He preached forgiveness, family, and God's love every Sunday from the pulpit. But behind the stained glass, behind the sermons and smiles, there was a secret. A secret that, once exposed, would not only destroy him but lead to the kind of ending no one could have imagined, a gunshot, a body, and a truth so twisted it would haunt the congregation forever. Before we dive deep into this shocking case, where love, lies, and violence collide in a place you'd least expect, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dive crime stories. Now, let's begin. Brooksville was the kind of place where front doors stayed unlocked, the grocery store still bagged your items with a smile, and Sunday church service was the week's social highlight. Everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. At the center of this close-knit community stood Pastor Jonathan Miles, a man who, to most, was the very embodiment of grace and goodness. At 46, Jonathan had the sort of presence that filled a room without effort. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed chestnut hair streaked lightly with gray, and warm brown eyes that seemed to look straight into your soul. On Sundays, when he stepped up to the pulpit of St. Peter's Grace Chapel, it was as if the air shifted. He spoke with a deep, steady voice that made the simplest phrases sound like scripture. People listened, not just because he was their pastor, but because he made them believe that he cared. And maybe, in his own way, he did. Jonathan's life, at least from the outside, looked blessed. He was married to Elaine Miles, his high school sweetheart, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes who volunteered at the local library. They had 2 children, Daniel, 17, tall and athletic, and Grace, 15, shy but bright, with a talent for piano. The family lived in the Parsonage, a charming 2-story white house just a stone's throw from the church. If you asked the townsfolk, Jonathan wasn't just a pastor, he was the man to call in times of trouble. He organized food drives, counseled couples on the brink of divorce, and made hospital visits at all hours. He'd once stayed up all night with a young man struggling with addiction, talking him down from ending his life. Jonathan never sought credit for these acts. His philosophy was simple: God sees. That's enough. It was this quiet heroism that made him so beloved. In a world full of moral gray areas, Jonathan seemed like a rare black and white figure, a good man through and through. He was the one who blessed newborns, prayed over the sick, and buried the dead. But there's a truth about people that Brooksville, for all its neighborly warmth, like to forget: no one is without secrets. Even the ones you trust the most. For Jonathan, that truth began to take shape one warm spring afternoon. He was locking up the church after a midweek prayer meeting when he spotted a stranger across the street. The man leaned against a beat-up motorcycle, cigarette dangling from his lips, watching the pastor with an unreadable expression. Jonathan didn't know it then, but that stranger, with his leather jacket, sunburned skin, and piercing green eyes, would be the match that lit a fire Jonathan could never put out. For now, though, Jonathan simply smiled politely, gave a small nod, and walked toward the parsonage. Behind him, the stranger exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke, a ghost of a grin curling on his lips. Brooksville would soon learn that not even the perfect pastor could escape temptation. And when temptation came calling, it wouldn't just knock, it would kick the door down. The next Sunday, Pastor Jonathan Miles stood at the pulpit, his voice echoing warmly off the high arches of St. Peter's Grace Chapel. The congregation listened intently, old couples holding hands, young families juggling restless children, teenagers slouched in the back pretending not to care. But Jonathan's gaze shifted more than once toward the last row. There he was again. The same man from earlier in the week. Same leather jacket. Same cigarette smell clinging to his clothes. Same piercing green eyes. Eyes that seemed to study Jonathan, not with admiration or even hostility, but with curiosity. When the service ended, people formed a line to shake Jonathan's hand. The stranger waited until nearly everyone had left before stepping forward. Lucas Ward. That's what he said his name was. 32 years old. Recently moved to Brooksville. And then, almost like he knew it would drop a ripple into Jonathan's calm waters, he added quietly, just got out of prison. Jonathan didn't flinch. In fact, his smile widened. Everyone deserves a second chance, he replied, gripping Lucas's hand firmly. Later that day, Jonathan found himself thinking about Lucas. He'd heard rumors already, it didn't take long in a town like Brooksville. Armed robbery. 7 years inside. No family here except an uncle who ran the auto repair shop on the edge of town. People said he was trouble, the kind you should steer clear of. But Jonathan's entire ministry was built on redemption. And Lucas? Well, there was something in the man's eyes. Not just hardness, but hurt. A deep, restless hurt Jonathan recognized from years of counseling the broken. 2 days later, Lucas walked into Jonathan's office. He said he wanted help, someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge him for his past. He'd been to a few churches before, he explained, but the moment they learned about his record, the smiles faded. Jonathan offered him coffee. They talked for over an hour. Lucas spoke about prison life, about waking up every day with walls around him, about the constant fights and the need to watch your back. But underneath the toughness was vulnerability, a quiet confession that he didn't know how to be normal anymore. Jonathan told him the church doors were always open. More importantly, he told him he was always available, day or night. That night, Elaine noticed Jonathan was quieter than usual at dinner. "You okay?" she asked. "Just thinking about a parishioner," he replied with a faint smile. And somewhere, deep down, Jonathan knew Lucas Ward would not be just another parishioner. From that day forward, Lucas became a regular visitor at St. Peter's Grace Chapel. Some came to pray, some came for community. Lucas came for Jonathan. And Jonathan was starting to notice. The first few weeks of Jonathan and Lucas's meetings seemed harmless enough. They'd sit in the pastor's office, Lucas in the chair across from the desk, Jonathan leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, listening with the kind of undivided attention that made people feel seen. Lucas talked about his job at his uncle's auto shop, the way people crossed the street to avoid him, the way his record followed him like a shadow. Jonathan offered encouragement. "You're not who you were, Lucas. You're who you choose to be now." It was the kind of line Jonathan had said 100 times before, but this time, it felt different. Lucas wasn't like the others. He didn't just soak in Jonathan's words, he studied him, as if trying to read the man behind the polished sermons. Then came the night that shifted everything. A spring thunderstorm rolled into Brooksville, heavy rain slamming against the parsonage windows. Elaine and the kids were visiting her sister 2 towns over, leaving Jonathan alone in the house. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Jonathan opened it to find Lucas, soaked to the skin, his leather jacket dripping onto the porch. "Lost power at my place," Lucas said. "Didn't feel like sitting in the dark." Jonathan hesitated only a second before stepping aside. "Come in." They ended up in the living room, Jonathan handing Lucas a towel and a mug of coffee. The rain was loud, the power flickered, and their conversation drifted from small talk into personal territory. Jonathan found himself admitting things he rarely shared. His frustrations with church politics, the loneliness that sometimes crept in even when surrounded by people. Lucas listened, eyes steady. "You're human, Jonathan. People put you on a pedestal, but you get lonely too." Jonathan didn't respond right away. But the truth of it hit harder than he wanted to admit. They talked until the coffee ran out. And then, in a moment Jonathan would replay in his mind for months to come, Lucas reached out, just a light touch on Jonathan's hand. It should have ended there. Jonathan should have pulled away, should have remembered his vows, his position, his faith. But instead, he didn't move. 1 second of stillness turned into another. And then Jonathan leaned in, just enough for the distance between them to close. The kiss was brief, almost hesitant. But when they pulled apart, the air between them had changed. Something had been set in motion, something neither of them could take back. From that night on, their counseling sessions moved beyond scripture and prayer. They met in quiet corners of town, in the back of Lucas's truck, sometimes in motel rooms miles away where no one would recognize them. For Jonathan, it was like stepping into a secret life, dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to resist. For Lucas, it was power, and maybe something deeper. But secrets don't stay hidden in towns like Brooksville. And the more the passion grew, the closer they edged toward the point of no return. For a while, Jonathan and Lucas lived in their own bubble. They met when they could, always careful, or at least Jonathan thought they were. A passing handshake during Sunday service. A late-night text. A quick rendezvous in the dimly lit corner of a back-road diner where the waitress knew better than to ask questions. But bubbles always burst. It started with Lucas's questions. At first, they were casual. When's the next time Elaine's going to visit her sister? Think you could take a Sunday off sometime? Then they turned heavier. Do you ever think about leaving her? What would you do if people knew about us? Jonathan would laugh it off, trying to keep the tone light. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Lucas. We have to be careful. But Lucas didn't want careful. He wanted more. One afternoon in early June, Lucas showed up at Jonathan's office unannounced. His eyes were stormy, his voice low. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being your secret. Jonathan closed the office door quickly, worried someone might hear. Lucas, you know what's at stake. My family. My congregation. Everything I've worked for. Lucas leaned in close. And what about me, Jonathan? I've been out of prison for less than a year, and I'm risking everything for you. You think I'm going to spend the rest of my life sneaking around like I'm doing something dirty? Jonathan tried to calm him. We can't just. But Lucas cut him off. Then maybe I should just tell Elaine. Or better yet, he gave a cold smile, maybe I'll stand up in church on Sunday and tell the whole congregation. The words hit Jonathan like a slap. He could see it, the gasps, the whispers, the headlines. His entire life collapsing in a single, shattering moment. He tried to reason with Lucas, but something in the younger man had shifted. This wasn't the same guarded, vulnerable ex-con he'd first met. This Lucas had sharp edges, and he was willing to use them. Jonathan offered him money. Not much at first, just a little help with rent, groceries. Lucas took it. But soon it wasn't enough. New clothes. A new phone. Cash for emergencies. Jonathan told himself it was just to keep the peace. But deep down, he knew he was being bled dry. And worse. Lucas had learned exactly how much power he held. What had once felt thrilling was now laced with dread. Jonathan started checking over his shoulder more often, dreading every unannounced knock at his door. Because Lucas's threats weren't just words anymore, they were promises. And promises like that had a way of ending in blood. The night of April 14th was the kind of night Brooksville seemed to hold its breath. The air hung still. No wind in the trees, no voices from the street. Inside the parsonage, only the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, until a sudden knock at the door broke it. Jonathan already knew who it would be. When he opened the door, Lucas was standing there, his leather jacket unzipped, eyes glinting in the dim porch light. He didn't wait to be invited in. He brushed past Jonathan, heading straight into the living room. Jonathan closed the door, already bracing himself. It's late, Lucas. Lucas turned, his voice tight. I don't care what time it is. We're doing this now. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Doing what? You're going to tell your wife. Tonight. Or I'll do it for you. Jonathan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You think this is the way to get what you want? Threatening me? Lucas stepped closer. No, Jonathan. This is the way to make you listen. The tension was thick, heavy enough to press down on the walls. Jonathan's heart was pounding, but his voice stayed calm. I have given you more than you deserve. My time. My trust. Money when you asked for it. But you keep pushing. You made me a promise, Lucas snapped. I made a mistake, Jonathan shot back. Lucas's expression hardened. He moved toward the coffee table, knocking over a stack of church bulletins as if to punctuate the moment. Jonathan stepped around him, his hand moving instinctively toward the small drawer of the side table, the one that held his father's old revolver. He didn't want to use it. He just wanted Lucas to see it and leave. Jonathan pulled the weapon out, holding it low, his voice firm. Get out, Lucas. But Lucas didn't back away. He tilted his head slightly, a slow, mocking grin forming on his lips. You won't use that. Don't test me, Jonathan warned. Lucas moved fast. He stepped in close, shoving Jonathan's shoulder with one hand while grabbing for the gun with the other. The two men struggled. Jonathan's grip was strong, but Lucas was younger, leaner, and fueled by rage. The revolver jerked between them, their hands sliding over the cold metal. Jonathan tried to twist it away, but Lucas used his free hand to slam Jonathan into the wall. The thud rattled the picture frames. Jonathan's breath caught, his fingers loosening just enough for Lucas to wrench the weapon free. For a moment, they stood there, both breathing hard. Jonathan's chest rose and fell, his eyes fixed on the gun now pointed directly at him. Lucas, don't, Jonathan said quietly. But Lucas's jaw was clenched tight, his grip firm. You had your chance. You don't get to throw me away like trash. Jonathan took one slow step forward, his hands slightly raised. We can talk about this. Just, put it down. Lucas's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. Jonathan staggered back, his hands clutching his chest as the deep red stain spread quickly through his shirt. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the carpet. The gun slipped from Lucas's hand onto the floor, the metal clinking softly. He stared down at Jonathan, eyes glazed, breath shallow, for a long, frozen second. Then, without a word, Lucas turned and walked out the door, his footsteps fading into the still night. Jonathan's body lay motionless, the faint ticking of the wall clock marking the seconds until the house fell into complete, suffocating silence. Police were called at 10:47 p.m. When they arrived, they found Jonathan Miles lying on the living room floor, a single bullet wound to the chest. Lucas Ward was nowhere to be found. A manhunt began immediately. The town was in shock. Not only for the murder but for the scandal, a respected pastor having a same-sex affair with an ex-con. Elaine returned home to a nightmare, her husband dead, her marriage exposed, her family name dragged through the mud. Congregation members were split, some refused to believe the affair rumors, others felt betrayed. Police traced Lucas to an abandoned farmhouse 20 miles away. Inside, they found signs he had been there, food wrappers, cigarette butts, but he was gone. It took 3 days before Lucas was spotted by a truck driver at a gas station. Police moved in. Lucas was arrested without incident. In his interrogation, he admitted to the affair but claimed the shooting was self-defense. He alleged that Jonathan had pulled the gun first, furious that Lucas planned to tell Elaine the truth. However, forensic evidence painted a different picture. The gun belonged to Jonathan, yes, but there were no signs of a struggle. The trajectory of the bullet suggested Lucas was standing over Jonathan when he fired. Prosecutors argued it was a crime of passion, Lucas killed Jonathan in anger when the pastor refused to leave his wife. The trial was explosive. Witnesses testified about seeing Lucas and Jonathan together in suspicious circumstances. Private text messages were read aloud, revealing intimate exchanges between the two men. Elaine took the stand, visibly shaken, describing how she had noticed her husband growing distant but never imagined the truth. Lucas's defense tried to paint Jonathan as manipulative, claiming he led Lucas on and used his position of power to control him. The prosecution countered with the fact that Lucas had a history of violence and had previously threatened Jonathan. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Lucas was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He showed little emotion as the judge read the sentence. For Brooksville, the scandal left deep scars. St. Peter's Grace Chapel saw a drop in attendance. Elaine eventually moved away with her children, seeking a fresh start. The parsonage where Jonathan was killed sat empty for years, a silent reminder of the night the town's faith was shaken to its core. In the end, this story wasn't just about murder. It was about secrets, the kind that thrive in the dark, the kind that grow until they explode. Jonathan Miles lived a double life, and Lucas Ward became both his refuge and his undoing. Together, they built a bond out of desire and danger. And when that bond broke, it took a life with it. What do you think? Was this truly a crime of passion, or was Lucas's claim of self-defense believable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive compelling, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another one of our true crime breakdowns. And remember, the truth may be stranger and darker than you think.